They were laughing. That's what I remember most. Not the sound of my laptop shattering against the wall or the ripping of photo albums or even the first blow when Derek's fist connected with my face. It was the laughter. Brianna and her friends stood in the doorway of what used to be my childhood bedroom, phones out, recording, giggling like they were watching some viral prank video instead of witnessing my stepfather destroy everything I owned while I begged him to stop. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'd come home early from work because the flu had hit me hard. Fever of 102, chills so bad I couldn't stop shaking. My boss Nicole had taken one look at me hunched over my desk at the tech support center and ordered me home. I just needed to sleep, to recover in my own bed. What I found instead was Brianna hosting an impromptu party in my room. 5 of her college friends sprawled across my bed, rifling through my things, trying on my clothes, one of them scrolling through my laptop that I'd stupidly left unlocked that morning in my rush to get to work. When I asked them to leave, Brianna had laughed that same laugh. "It's just stuff, Maya. Don't be so uptight." But it wasn't just stuff. That laptop contained 3 years of work on a certification program I was building in my spare time. The photo albums they were flipping through held the only pictures I had of my grandmother who'd raised me until I was 8. The jewelry box they'd dumped out contained her wedding ring, the one thing of value she'd left me. I'd raised my voice then. Something I never did in that house. I'd learned early that staying quiet, staying small, staying useful meant staying safe. But fever and exhaustion and seeing a stranger wearing my grandmother's necklace like a costume piece made something crack inside me. I told them to get out. Actually screamed it. That's when Derek came upstairs. He didn't ask what was wrong. Didn't check if I was okay despite the obvious sickness radiating off me. He just saw his precious Brianna looking upset and me standing there, flushed with fever and fury, and made his choice the same choice he'd been making for 13 years. His hand shot out so fast I didn't have time to dodge. The backhand caught me across the cheekbone, and I went down hard, my already weakened body offering no resistance. "Get up," he said, his voice that dangerous calm that was somehow worse than yelling. "You don't raise your voice in this house. You don't disrespect my daughter." From the floor, tasting blood, I watched him systematically destroy my room. He swept my desk clear with one arm. The laptop, the external hard drives where I backed up everything, my tablet, all of it crashed to the floor. He yanked my clothes from the closet, throwing them in a heap. The photo albums he ripped apart, pages scattering like confetti. My grandmother's jewelry box he emptied into his pocket. "For safekeeping," he said with a smile that made my skin crawl. Brianna's friends had gone quiet by then, but they didn't leave. They just stood there, phones still out, bearing witness to my humiliation. One of them, a blonde girl whose name I'd never learned, whispered something to Brianna. They both laughed. When Derek was done, when my room looked like a crime scene, he grabbed me by the hair and pulled me up. "You're going to clean this up," he said. "And then you're going to apologize to Brianna and her friends for ruining their afternoon." I should have apologized. The old Maya, the one who'd survived 13 years in this house by being agreeable and invisible, would have done exactly that. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the fever burning through my brain. Maybe it was watching my grandmother's photos torn and scattered. Maybe it was simply that I'd finally had enough. "No," I said. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Derek's face went red, then purple. His fist cocked back, and I knew this next hit would be worse than the slap. But before he could swing, my phone rang from where it had fallen on the floor. Nicole's name flashed on the screen. Derek hesitated. The moment stretched. Then he shoved me backward into the pile of my destroyed belongings. "You've got until tomorrow to be out," he said. "Carol's at her sister's for the week. When she gets back, you're gone. Do you understand?" I understood perfectly. Without my mother there to witness, without her to perform his version of family man, he could finally do what he'd wanted to do for years. Get rid of me completely. He left. Brianna and her friends followed, their laughter drifting back up the stairs like smoke. I sat in the wreckage of my room, shaking from fever and shock and rage, and answered Nicole's call. "Maya, you sound terrible," she said. "Did you make it home okay?" The concern in her voice, genuine and uncomplicated, made something inside me break. I started crying, really crying, for the first time in years. "No," I managed to say. "I didn't make it home. Because this place had never been home. My name is Maya Jensen and I'm 27 years old. For the past 6 years I've worked in tech support at a mid-sized software company in Portland, Oregon. I'm the person you talk to when your password won't work or your system crashes or you need someone to walk you through basic troubleshooting. It's not glamorous work, but I'm good at it. Really good. I have a 98% customer satisfaction rating and I've trained half the new hires in the past 2 years. My co-workers joke that I can fix anything, which is ironic because I couldn't fix my own life for over a decade. The house in Beaverton where I grew up, where Derek just destroyed my room, wasn't always a war zone. My mother Carol and I moved there when I was 14, just the two of us after my grandmother passed away. Those first few months alone together were hard, but they were ours. We ate cereal for dinner and watched old movies and talked about the future. Mom was working double shifts as a dental hygienist trying to save enough for a down payment on a smaller place, something more affordable. Then she met Derek at a community barbecue that summer. He was a facilities manager for a chain of gyms, drove a nice truck, owned his own home. He seemed stable, safe, everything my mother had been searching for since my father disappeared when I was 4. I don't remember my dad at all except for a vague impression of cigarette smoke and arguing. My grandmother never talked about him except to say some men aren't built for staying. Derek seemed built for staying. He was attentive in those early days, bringing my mother flowers, taking us both out to dinner, asking me about school with what seemed like genuine interest. When he proposed after 6 months, I was genuinely happy for my mom. She deserved something good. The wedding was small, just immediate family and a few friends at a restaurant in downtown Portland. I wore a purple dress my grandmother would have loved. Brianna was 13 then, sullen and resentful about her dad remarrying just 2 years after her mother had left him for someone else. She'd made it clear from the start that she blamed all women for her mother's betrayal, and I was no exception. The first night we all lived together in Derek's house, she cornered me in the bathroom. "This is my house," she said. "You're just visiting." I should have seen the patterns earlier. The way Derek's kindness only appeared in public. The way he'd criticize my mother's cooking when no one else was around, then praise it loudly at family gatherings. The way he'd offer to help with my homework but turn it into hour-long lectures about my stupidity when I didn't understand something immediately. The way money was always tight for my mother and me while Brianna got new clothes and electronics and whatever else she wanted. But I was 14 and desperate for stability after losing my grandmother. I told myself this was just how families worked, how stepfamilies adjusted. My mother seemed happier than she'd been in years. That had to count for something. The physical stuff started small. A shove here. A grip on my arm that left bruises there. Always with plausible deniability. Always when my mother wasn't looking. By the time I was 16, I'd learned to read Derek's moods like a weather system, to make myself scarce when storms were brewing, to agree with whatever he said even when it made no sense. Brianna learned from watching him. She tested boundaries constantly, taking my things, spreading rumors about me at school, turning her friends against me. When I complained to my mother, Carol would sigh and say sisters fight, as if casual cruelty was just typical sibling behavior. When I tried to explain it was more than that, she'd get defensive. "Derek has been so good to us, Maya. Can't you try harder to get along with his daughter?" So I tried harder. I got a job at 16, bagging groceries at the supermarket near our house. Derek decided I should contribute to household expenses, $100 a month for room and board. My mother protested weakly but ultimately agreed. I was learning early lessons about work and responsibility, they said. Really, I was learning that my presence in that house came with a price tag. I got my first computer when I was 17. Not from Derek or my mother, but from my grandmother's estate. Her lawyer had tracked me down, explaining that she'd left a small savings account in my name. $3,000 that had been sitting untouched since her death. Derek tried to convince me to put it toward family expenses, toward Brianna's college fund, toward the roof that allegedly needed repairs. My mother agreed it would be the responsible thing to do. Instead, I bought a used laptop and enrolled in online courses for IT certification. That computer became my escape hatch. While Brianna partied downstairs and Derek watched sports and my mother worked late shifts to avoid the tension in her own home, I taught myself networking, security protocols, database management. I was good at it. Better than good. Code made sense in a way human relationships never had. There were rules, logic, clear cause and effect. If something broke, you could trace it back to the exact line where the error occurred and fix it. By 19 I had my first certification. By 20 I was working full-time at TechCore Solutions, the software company where I still work today. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The job came with decent pay and, more importantly, independence. I could have moved out then. Should have moved out. But Derek had convinced my mother to refinance the house to pay for Brianna's private college tuition, and suddenly they were drowning in mortgage payments they couldn't afford. My mother came to me crying, desperate. Just until we get back on our feet, she begged. Just a few months. Those few months turned into 7 years. I paid rent that somehow always increased whenever I got a raise. I covered utilities when Derek was between jobs, which happened with suspicious frequency. I bought groceries that Brianna and her friends would demolish in days. I fixed every computer problem, every phone issue, every technical difficulty anyone in that house encountered. I was the IT department and the bank and the punching bag all rolled into one. The physical violence was sporadic enough that I could almost pretend it wasn't a pattern. A shove when I said the wrong thing. A slap when I came home too late from work. Once, a punch to the stomach that left me gasping when I suggested Brianna should get a job instead of taking a gap year to find herself in Europe on my dime. Always followed by apologies, by promises, by my mother's tears and pleas to keep the family together. I started documenting everything when I was 24. Not because I planned to do anything with the information, but because I needed proof I wasn't going crazy. I kept a journal with dates and details of every incident, every financial demand, every invasion of privacy. I took photos of bruises I could hide under work clothes. I saved every text message where Derek demanded money or Brianna asked for just one more favor. The evidence accumulated like interest on a debt I didn't know how to repay. Work became my sanctuary. Nicole Torres, my supervisor, was the closest thing I had to a friend. She was 10 years older than me, a single mother who'd clawed her way up from help desk to operations manager through pure determination. She noticed things others didn't. The way I flinched at loud noises. The long sleeves even in summer. The fact that I never talked about my family beyond vague mentions. You know, she'd said once over coffee, you don't owe anyone your whole life just because you share a house with them. I'd laughed it off then, but the words stuck. 3 months before the bedroom incident, I'd started seeing Dr. Sarah Patel, a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Nicole had recommended her after finding me crying in the server room following a particularly vicious text exchange with Derek about money. The first session was awkward. Dr. Patel asked me to describe my home life and I'd minimized everything out of habit. It's not that bad, I kept saying. Other people have it worse. By the third session she'd gently but firmly challenged that narrative. Maya, she'd said, abuse doesn't have to be constant to be real. You don't have to be hospitalized to be hurt. What you're describing is a pattern of control, exploitation, and violence. That's abuse. The word felt too big, too dramatic. Abuse was what happened on TV, in news stories, to other people. Not to a financially independent 27-year-old woman with a good job and her own bank account. But Dr. Patel had me start tracking my expenses, really tracking them. When I added up 7 years of rent that exceeded market rate, bills I'd covered, emergencies I'd funded, and outright gifts demanded, the number was staggering. $43,000, not counting the emotional toll or the physical harm. I'd been planning to move out. Had even looked at apartments in my price range, one-bedroom places in decent neighborhoods where I could finally have space that was truly mine. But every time I got close to signing a lease, something would happen. Derek would lose another job. My mother would need an emergency root canal. Brianna's car would break down. The guilt would crush me and I'd stay, telling myself just a few more months, just until things stabilize. Things never stabilized because Derek and Brianna didn't want them to stabilize. They wanted me exactly where I was, accessible and useful and too ground down to fight back. That's what made the bedroom destruction different. I'd been sick, vulnerable, clearly suffering, and Derek's response had been violence. Brianna's response had been entertainment. Even the friends who'd witnessed it, strangers who owed me nothing, had chosen mockery over basic human decency. Something crystallized in that moment on the floor surrounded by the ruins of my possessions. These people would never change. No amount of money or patience or trying harder would earn me respect or safety or love. I was a resource to them, nothing more. When I finally pulled myself together enough to assess the damage, the scope of destruction took my breath away. The laptop was cracked beyond repair, the screen shattered, the hard drive likely corrupted. The external drives I'd used for backup were smashed. Years of work on my advanced certification program, gone. The photos of my grandmother, torn and scattered, some ground into the carpet by Derek's boots. Her jewelry, pocketed by a man who'd never met her and wouldn't recognize the value of anything that couldn't be pawned. My clothes were in a heap, some torn, some with the buttons ripped off in Derek's frenzy. My bed was stripped, the mattress slashed in several places with what must have been a knife. He'd been thorough. This wasn't random anger, it was calculated destruction meant to send a message. You have nothing here. You are nothing here. But he'd made a mistake. In his rage, Derek had overlooked one thing. I'd set up a cloud backup system 6 months earlier, part of my job training in data security and disaster recovery. Every document, every photo I'd scanned, every piece of my certification coursework was safely stored on remote servers he didn't know existed and couldn't touch. I sat on the floor of my destroyed room, fever still making everything feel surreal and distant, and logged into my cloud account from my phone. Everything was there. Intact. Safe. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I could leave. I could actually leave. All the reasons I'd convinced myself I couldn't, the lost work, the precious photos, the proof of my education and credentials, none of it was really lost. Only the physical objects were gone and objects could be replaced. I called Nicole back. When she answered, I didn't bother with small talk. Can I stay with you tonight? I asked. Just tonight. I'll find something else tomorrow. She didn't hesitate. Pack what you can. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited, I walked through the house one last time. My mother's bedroom door was closed, her absence a presence all its own. Had she known Derek planned this? Had she suspected what he was capable of when she left for her sisters? Or had she simply chosen once again not to know, not to see, not to acknowledge what was happening under her own roof? Brianna's door was open. I could hear her and her friends laughing downstairs, probably rewatching the videos they'd taken. Evidence, I realized. They'd created evidence of their own cruelty, documented it proudly. Derek was in the garage, I could hear him moving around, probably stashing my grandmother's jewelry somewhere he thought was clever. I grabbed what I could salvage. Some clothes that weren't destroyed. My work laptop that I'd thankfully left in my car that morning. Important documents I kept in a fireproof box, birth certificate, social security card, bank statements. The torn photos of my grandmother I gathered carefully, thinking maybe they could be repaired, or at least preserved as evidence. When Nicole's car pulled up, I walked out without looking back. Derek didn't come out to stop me. Brianna didn't say goodbye. The house that had never really been home simply let me go, probably relieved to be rid of the person who'd finally stopped being useful. Nicole's apartment was small but immaculate, a 2-bedroom in southeast Portland that smelled like lavender and coffee. She set me up on her couch with blankets and tea, took one look at my face, and said we'd talk in the morning. I slept 14 hours straight, my body finally surrendering to the flu now that I was somewhere safe enough to be weak. When I woke up, Nicole was at her kitchen table with her laptop open. She'd taken a personal day. "Maya," she said without preamble, "I need you to tell me everything. And I mean everything." So I did. 7 years of financial exploitation. The escalating violence. The bedroom destruction. As I talked, she took notes, her expression shifting from concern to anger to something harder and more determined. "We're documenting this," she said when I finished. "Every bruise, every damaged item, every witness. And then you're talking to a lawyer." "I don't have money for a lawyer." "You don't need money up front. I know someone who handles cases like this." She pulled out her phone and within an hour I had an appointment scheduled with James Keller, an attorney who specialized in domestic violence and civil suits. The next 3 days passed in a blur of doctor's visits, police reports, and legal consultations. The doctor who examined me documented bruises in various stages of healing, evidence of ongoing physical abuse. She asked careful questions about my safety and gave me resource pamphlets I was too numb to read. The police were less helpful. "It's a family matter," the officer said when I tried to file a report about the bedroom destruction. "Your name's not on the deed. Technically it's not your property." "But the assault," I pressed. "You saw the photos of my face. Did you want to press charges against your stepfather?" The way he said it made clear what he thought of that idea. "Creating more problems for your mother." I left the police station feeling defeated until James Keller's office called to move up my appointment. When I met him 2 days later in a modest office near the courthouse, he listened to my story with the kind of focused attention that made me understand why Nicole had recommended him. He was maybe 40, with graying hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd heard too many stories like mine. "Here's what we're looking at," he said after I'd walked him through everything. "Civil suit for destruction of property and emotional distress. Restraining order against Derek. Possibly criminal charges if we can get the DA interested, though that's a long shot with family cases. The witnesses, Brianna's friends, can we compel them to testify? Some of them recorded it." He leaned forward. "They recorded the assault and destruction?" I nodded. "It's probably on social media by now. Brianna loves attention." James actually smiled. "Then they've done our job for us. I need you to find those videos. Social media posts, any platform they might have used. Don't download them yourself, just document where they are. We'll subpoena the actual files." It took me 2 days of searching through Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat using fake accounts Nicole helped me create. I found 3 separate videos from that afternoon. One showed Derek destroying my room while I pleaded with him to stop. Another captured the moment he hit me, the sound of impact making me flinch even through my phone speaker. The third was Brianna giving commentary like a sports announcer while her friends laughed. The videos had thousands of views. Comments ranged from supportive to cruel, but several people had tagged accounts that appeared to belong to abuse advocacy organizations. The incident was already semi-viral in certain corners of social media, strangers debating whether what they'd witnessed constituted abuse or just family drama. James was ecstatic when I showed him the documentation. "This is gold," he said. "Not just evidence but public evidence. Derek can't claim it didn't happen or wasn't that bad when thousands of people watched it online." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I stayed with Nicole and tried to work remotely, though concentration was nearly impossible. My mother finally called 4 days after I'd left. "Maya, sweetheart, where are you? Derek said you just ran off. He's worried sick." The gaslighting was so reflexive I almost admired its efficiency. "Mom," I said carefully, "I'm not coming back. Derek destroyed my room and assaulted me. Brianna's friends recorded it. "Oh honey, you're being dramatic. Derek said you attacked Brianna and he was just trying to calm you down." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You weren't even there. You were at Aunt Linda's. Derek told me what happened. And you believed him without even calling me? Without checking if I was okay?" There was a long pause. "You're really going to tear this family apart over a misunderstanding?" "It's not a misunderstanding when there's video evidence, Mom. I've filed for a restraining order." "You've what?" Her voice went shrill. "Maya, you can't do that. What will people think? What will Derek's family say?" Not once in that conversation did she ask if I was hurt. Not once did she express concern for my well-being. It was all about appearances, about keeping Derek happy, about maintaining the fiction that we were a normal family. I hung up on her mid-sentence and blocked her number. James had warned me this would happen. Enablers panic when victims start setting boundaries, he'd said. They'll try guilt, threats, anything to restore the status quo. Your mother's identity is wrapped up in this marriage. Admitting Derek is abusive means admitting she failed to protect you. Most people can't handle that truth. The restraining order hearing was surreal. Derek showed up in a suit, playing the role of respectable family man. My mother sat beside him in the gallery, tissue clutched in her hand like a prop. Brianna wasn't there, probably couldn't be bothered to take time away from classes. James presented our evidence methodically. The videos, the medical records, my documentation of years of abuse. Derek's lawyer, a public defender who looked barely out of law school, tried to paint me as a disgruntled stepdaughter making false accusations. Then James played the videos. Watching that footage in court, on a large screen where every detail was visible, I saw things I'd missed in the moment. The calculated way Derek had destroyed only my belongings, leaving Brianna's things untouched. The moment when he'd pocketed my grandmother's jewelry, clear theft on camera. The precise control in his violence, hitting me hard enough to hurt but in places that wouldn't show in short sleeves. This wasn't a man who'd lost control. This was someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The judge, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, watched the videos without expression. When they finished, she looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Morrison, is that you in these recordings?" "Yes, Your Honor, but I can explain." "There's no explanation that makes this acceptable." She granted the restraining order immediately. 500 feet, no contact direct or indirect. She also ordered Derek to return my grandmother's jewelry within 72 hours or face contempt charges. My mother was crying in the gallery, but they were angry tears, not sad ones. As we left the courthouse, she caught up to me in the parking lot. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. 13 years I've put into this marriage and you destroy it in 5 minutes with your lies." "They're not lies, Mom. Thousands of people watched it happen. You chose to believe Derek over your own daughter without even asking my side. That's on you, not me." She slapped me then, hard enough that my head snapped to the side. James was there immediately, stepping between us. "Mrs. Morrison, you just assaulted your daughter in front of witnesses including her attorney. I suggest you leave now before I add you to the restraining order." She left, but not before hissing one final threat. "You'll regret this. Derek has friends. You have no idea what you've started." Over the next 2 weeks, I learned exactly what I'd started. Derek's response to the restraining order was to wage a campaign of harassment that stayed just barely on the legal side. He couldn't contact me directly, but he had plenty of people willing to do it for him. Anonymous social media accounts started messaging me with threats and insults. Someone posted my work email on a forum known for harassment, flooding my inbox with vitriol. My car, parked at Nicole's apartment, was keyed twice. The police said there was no proof Derek was behind it. Brianna was less subtle. She started a GoFundMe claiming I'd stolen her college fund and left the family destitute. The page included edited versions of the bedroom videos that made it look like I'd instigated the conflict. It raised $3,000 before I was able to get it taken down for fraud. She also started contacting my coworkers, spinning stories about my instability and lying. Most people ignored her, but the constant drama was exhausting. James filed a civil suit against Derek for the destroyed property, medical expenses, and emotional distress. He also sent demand letters about the stolen jewelry. Derek's response was to file a countersuit claiming I owed him back rent and had stolen family heirlooms when I moved out. The jewelry I was demanding back, he claimed, had belonged to his mother, not mine. It was absurd, easily disproven, but it dragged the legal process out for months. Through all of this, work became my anchor. My boss, understanding the situation, allowed me to work remotely full-time and adjusted my schedule around court dates and lawyer meetings. Nicole checked on me constantly, making sure I was eating and sleeping and not spiraling into despair. And slowly, very slowly, I started to realize something. Without Derek's demands for money, without Brianna's constant emergencies, without my mother's guilt trips, I had resources I'd never had before. Money in savings. Time for myself. Mental space to think about what I actually wanted instead of what everyone else needed from me. I started looking at apartments again, but this time in Seattle. A fresh start somewhere nobody knew my story, where I could build a life on my own terms. TechCore had a Seattle office that was always looking for experienced analysts. When I mentioned I was thinking about transferring, my boss didn't hesitate. "We'd love to have you up there," she said. "I'll make some calls." 3 months after I'd left Derek's house, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill. Small but mine, with big windows and enough space to finally breathe. The day I got the keys, I stood in the empty living room and cried. Not from sadness but from the overwhelming relief of finally being free. Seattle rain felt different than Portland rain. Softer somehow, more persistent but less aggressive. I arrived on a gray October morning with everything I owned packed into my Honda Civic. The apartment in Capitol Hill was on the 3rd floor of an older building with hardwood floors that creaked and radiators that clanked to life at odd hours. It was perfect. The first week was disorienting. I'd wake up bracing for demands that never came, checking my phone for crisis messages that didn't arrive. The silence was strange, almost uncomfortable. I'd spent so long in survival mode that peace felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Dr. Patel, who I'd continued seeing remotely, called it hypervigilance. "Your nervous system is still expecting danger," she explained. "Give it time to understand you're safe now." Work at the Seattle office was different too. The team was smaller, more collaborative. My new manager, a guy named Tom Richardson who'd been with TechCore for 15 years, actually asked about work-life balance during my first week. "We don't do overtime heroics here," he said. "Burnout helps nobody. Go home at 5. Take your lunch breaks. If you're consistently overwhelmed, we adjust workload, not expectations." I didn't know how to function in an environment that treated employees like humans instead of resources. The first time I stayed late to finish a project, Tom stopped by my desk at 6:30. "Maya, what are you still doing here?" "Wrapping up the Anderson account migration." "It can wait until tomorrow. Log off." I stared at him. "But the deadline is Friday." "It's Tuesday. You're ahead of schedule. Go home, eat dinner, watch TV, live your life. This job is what you do, not who you are." That simple statement cracked something open inside me. For years, being useful had been my identity. The dependable one, the problem solver, the person who sacrificed so others could thrive. Without that role, who was I? The question haunted me through those first months in Seattle. I'd come home to my quiet apartment, make dinner for one, and sit by the window watching the city lights flicker on. The freedom I'd fought for felt vast and empty. Then I met Alex Chen. It was December, at a company holiday party I'd almost skipped. He worked in software development on a different floor, and we ended up in the same corner both trying to avoid the aggressive cheerfulness of forced fun. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he observed, handing me a drink. "Is it that obvious?" I took the glass gratefully. "Only to someone who feels the same way." He had an easy smile and kind eyes, the kind of person who seemed genuinely comfortable in his own skin. We spent the next hour talking about everything except work. Books, Seattle neighborhoods, the best ramen spots, whether the rain was actually worse here or just more constant. When he asked for my number, I panicked. The last time I tried dating was 3 years ago, a brief relationship that had ended when the guy got tired of my family constantly interfering. I don't really date, I said, the words coming out harsher than intended. Okay, Alex said without missing a beat. Coffee then. As friends. Strictly platonic caffeine consumption. Despite myself, I laughed. When? Tomorrow. There's a place in Fremont that does pour-overs that'll change your life. Coffee became a weekly thing, then twice weekly. Alex was patient in a way I wasn't used to. He never pushed for more than I was ready to give, never asked invasive questions about my past, seemed content to just exist in the present. Slowly, I started to trust that this friendship didn't come with hidden costs or expectations. When I finally told him about Derek in the bedroom and everything that came after, we were 4 months into our friendship, sitting in his apartment while rain hammered against the windows. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That's horrific, he finally said. I'm sorry you went through that. Then he asked the question nobody else had. Are you safe now? Legally? Yes. I have a restraining order. But emotionally? I thought about it. Getting there. He nodded. That's honest. I appreciate honest. The civil suit against Derek finally went to trial in February, almost a year after the bedroom incident. I had to go back to Portland for the proceedings, staying in a hotel near the courthouse because I couldn't stomach being in the same city as that house. James had prepared me thoroughly. Derek's lawyer would try to paint me as vindictive, ungrateful, a liar manufacturing evidence. The videos would speak for themselves, but I needed to stay calm under cross-examination. The trial lasted 3 days. Derek looked smaller somehow, diminished. My mother sat behind him every day, her face a mask of practiced suffering. Brianna showed up on day 2, dressed conservatively, playing the role of concerned daughter. When she took the stand to defend her father, she lied smoothly about what had happened that day. Maya had been stealing from us for years, she testified. Dad was just trying to stop her from taking more. The jewelry she claims was her grandmother's? That belonged to our family. She's confused. James destroyed her on cross-examination. He pulled up her social media posts from that day, captions where she'd bragged about teaching her stuck-up stepsister a lesson. He played the unedited videos where her laughter was clearly audible. He showed bank records proving I'd been giving them money, not taking it. By the time he was done, Brianna's composure had cracked completely. She left the stand in tears, and Derek's lawyer looked like he wanted to follow her out. When it was my turn to testify, I told the truth plainly and without embellishment. Years of financial exploitation, escalating violence, the destruction of my property, the theft of my inheritance. I showed the jury my documentation, the spreadsheets tracking money I'd given them, the photos of bruises, the medical records. Derek's lawyer tried to rattle me, suggesting I was bitter about my mother's remarriage, implying I'd provoked the violence, questioning why I'd stayed so long if things were really that bad. Because I was trying to keep my family together, I said. Because I thought if I just gave enough, tried hard enough, eventually I'd earn basic respect and safety. I was wrong. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Derek was liable for destruction of property, theft, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The judgment was for $68,000, plus legal fees and the return of my grandmother's jewelry. He was also ordered to pay punitive damages of $20,000. I felt nothing when the verdict was read. Not triumph, not relief, just a hollow acknowledgement that justice, when it finally came, couldn't undo the damage. Derek would probably never pay most of what he owed. The jewelry had already been sold, he claimed, though nobody believed him. But the public record of his abuse, the legal validation that what happened to me was wrong, that mattered more than money. My mother approached me outside the courthouse after the verdict. She looked older, worn down by the weight of choices she could no longer pretend hadn't been choices. "Maya," she started, and I held up a hand. "Don't. Whatever you're about to say, I don't want to hear it. I was your daughter. You were supposed to protect me. You chose him instead, over and over, and now you both get to live with those consequences. But I love you. If you loved me, you would have believed me. You would have left him the first time he hurt me. You would have done literally anything except what you did." She opened her mouth, closed it, tears streaming down her face. I walked away and didn't look back. That night, Alex picked me up from the hotel. We drove back to Seattle in comfortable silence, and when we crossed the city limits, I felt my shoulders finally relax. The trial was over. The legal battles were done. What happened next was entirely up to me. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms and longer days. I started seeing Dr. Patel in person at her Seattle office, digging deeper into the patterns that had kept me trapped. She introduced me to the concept of complex trauma, the way ongoing abuse rewires your brain, makes you doubt your own perceptions. We worked on building new neural pathways, new responses that didn't involve fawning or freezing. I also started volunteering at a local organization that helped people escaping domestic violence. At first I just answered phones on their crisis line, but eventually I began facilitating support groups for survivors. Telling my story to others who understood, hearing their stories in return, created a sense of community I'd never had. These people got it. They knew what it was like to love people who hurt you, to grieve relationships that were toxic, to rebuild from nothing. One woman in my group, a software engineer named Jordan Brooks, reminded me of myself at 20. Brilliant but beaten down, financially supporting abusive family members while barely surviving herself. She was trying to finish her degree while working full-time and sending money home to parents who'd never once asked how she was doing. "I see you," I told her after one session. "I see how hard you're trying to save everyone. But you can't pour from an empty cup. Eventually you have to save yourself first." She started crying. "But they're my family. They raised me." "I know. And they're using that obligation to bleed you dry. That's not love, Jordan. That's exploitation." 6 months later, Jordan moved into her own apartment, set boundaries with her family, and finished her degree. Watching her transformation reminded me why surviving had mattered. Not just for me, but for everyone I could help by showing them another way was possible. Alex and I got married 2 years after the trial. Small ceremony at a botanical garden in Seattle with 20 people who actually cared about us. Nicole was my maid of honor. Tom from work officiated after getting certified online specifically for our wedding. Jordan came with her new girlfriend, both of them glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from choosing yourself first. No one from my biological family was invited. No one from that old life got to witness this new one. The reception was at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. When the server brought the check, Alex reached for it automatically, but I touched his hand. "We split it," I said. He smiled, understanding what I meant. Equal partnership, equal responsibility. The way it should have always been. Work had become more than just a paycheck. I'd been promoted to IT security director, overseeing a team of 8 people. The job came with real authority and the ability to shape workplace culture. I implemented policies around work-life balance, mental health days without requiring explanations, and strict protocols against any form of harassment. My team knew they could come to me with problems without fear of retaliation. Several of them had confided their own stories of family abuse, workplace exploitation, toxic relationships they'd escaped. We built something rare in corporate environments. Actual trust. The money from Derek's judgment came in pieces over 3 years. He'd been forced to sell the house to pay it, which meant my mother had to move into a small apartment she could barely afford on her dental hygienist's salary. I heard about it through the legal grapevine, not from her directly. We hadn't spoken since the courthouse. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty about her circumstances, but Dr. Patel had helped me work through that impulse. Your mother made choices that led to consequences, she'd reminded me. Her discomfort now is the result of her own actions, not yours. You're not responsible for fixing what she broke. I used the judgment money to start a nonprofit called Rebuild Foundation. The mission was simple: provide emergency grants and resources to people escaping family abuse. Financial assistance for security deposits on apartments. Replacement laptops and phones for those whose property had been destroyed. Legal fund support for restraining orders and civil suits. Everything I'd needed and barely had access to, we provided to others. Jordan became our first program director. She understood intimately what our clients were going through because she'd lived it. Under her leadership, we helped 47 people in our first year. Each one represented someone who wouldn't have to choose between safety and homelessness, between justice and bankruptcy. The work was exhausting and occasionally heartbreaking, but it felt like alchemy. Transforming my worst experiences into someone else's escape route. 3 years into running Rebuild Foundation, I was invited to speak at a tech conference in San Francisco about workplace culture and supporting employees experiencing domestic situations. The audience was maybe 200 people, mostly HR directors and executives. I told my story without flinching. The bedroom destruction, the years of exploitation, the way work had been my only stable thing when everything else was chaos. But I also talked about what companies could do differently. How managers could watch for signs of abuse. How HR could create policies that protected vulnerable employees. How something as simple as flexible work arrangements or emergency salary advances could mean the difference between someone staying trapped or getting free. After the talk, a line formed of people wanting to share their own stories or ask questions. One woman, probably in her 50s, waited until everyone else had gone. She had the same tired eyes I remembered seeing in my own mirror. "My daughter is living what you described," she said quietly. Sending all her money to her boyfriend's family. Making excuses for bruises. I've tried talking to her, but she says I don't understand. What do I do? I thought carefully before answering. You can't save someone who isn't ready to save themselves. But you can make sure she knows you're there when she is ready. No judgment, no "I told you so," just support. And in the meantime, educate yourself about abuse dynamics so you understand what she's experiencing. The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Not for the advice. For surviving. For showing it's possible. That conversation stayed with me for weeks. I'd been so focused on helping survivors that I'd forgotten about the people who loved them, who watched helplessly as abuse unfolded. We expanded Rebuild Foundation services to include support groups for family members and friends of abuse victims. Teaching them how to help without enabling, how to maintain boundaries while offering support, how to recognize when their own well-being was being compromised. Brianna reached out when I was 32, 5 years after everything had fallen apart. The message came through LinkedIn, carefully worded and obviously drafted multiple times. Maya, I know I have no right to contact you. I know I was terrible to you. I've been in therapy for 2 years working through my own stuff. I'm not asking for forgiveness or a relationship. I just wanted you to know I understand now what I participated in. I'm sorry. That's all. I'm truly sorry. I stared at the message for 3 days before responding. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her sit with her guilt the way I'd sat with so much pain she'd caused. But Dr. Patel and I had talked about this possibility. Closure doesn't require reconciliation, she'd said. You can acknowledge someone's growth without letting them back into your life. I wrote back simply. I appreciate you telling me. I hope therapy continues to help you. I don't want a relationship, but I wish you well in your healing. She responded with a single word. Understood. That was enough. I didn't need her apology to move forward. I'd already moved forward. But knowing she'd finally seen her role in what happened, that felt like a small piece of justice I hadn't expected to receive. My mother never apologized. Never reached out except once through Aunt Linda, who sent a Facebook message saying Carol was sick and asking if I'd consider visiting. The sickness turned out to be a bad cold. The request was just another manipulation attempt. I blocked Aunt Linda and moved on. Some people never change. Some people never admit they were wrong. I'd made peace with that truth. Derek served 8 months in county jail for violating the restraining order after showing up at my old Portland apartment and harassing the new tenant, thinking it was me. When he got out, he moved to Arizona and I never heard about him again. Good riddance. The world was safer with him as far from me as possible. On my 33rd birthday, Alex surprised me with a weekend trip to the San Juan Islands. We stayed in a small cabin overlooking the water, spent our days hiking and our evenings watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that didn't seem real. On the last night, sitting on the deck with wine and the sound of waves, he asked me a question. Do you ever regret how things turned out? Not fighting for a relationship with your mom or Brianna? I thought about it honestly. 5 years ago I might have said yes. Even 2 years ago there were moments I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too unforgiving. But sitting there in that moment, with a husband who treated me as an equal, a career I loved, work that mattered, friends who showed up without needing to be paid in any currency, the answer was clear. No, I said. I don't regret choosing myself. I regret how long it took me to do it. He squeezed my hand. For what it's worth, I'm glad you eventually did. Otherwise I never would have met the real you. Just the survival version. The survival version had been tough and necessary, but she'd also been small, compressed, always braced for the next crisis. This version of me, the one who'd walked through fire and come out transformed rather than destroyed, she was bigger. Freer. Capable of joy that wasn't shadowed by dread. Rebuild Foundation grew beyond anything I'd imagined. By year 5 we had offices in 3 cities and a staff of 12. We'd helped over 300 people escape abusive situations, provided over $500,000 in emergency assistance, and connected countless others with legal resources and therapy. Jordan had been promoted to executive director while I focused on fundraising and advocacy work. The nonprofit world introduced me to others doing similar work, people who'd survived their own hells and turned that survival into purpose. We formed a coalition, sharing resources and strategies, amplifying each other's voices. I learned that my story wasn't unique, but it also wasn't common knowledge. So many people suffered in silence, believing their family's abuse was normal or deserved. We worked to change that narrative. I wrote a book about my experience. Not a memoir exactly, more a practical guide for people trying to escape family abuse. How to document evidence. How to find legal help. How to manage the guilt and grief that comes with setting boundaries. How to rebuild your life when you've lost the family you thought you had. The book sold modestly but reached the people who needed it most. I got emails regularly from readers saying it had given them the courage to leave, to fight back, to believe they deserved better. One email in particular struck me. A woman named Sarah wrote that she'd been sending money to her parents for 15 years, supporting their lifestyle while barely surviving herself. After reading my book, she'd finally said no. They'd cut her off completely, told everyone she was selfish and cruel. But for the first time in years, she had money in savings. She'd gone on a vacation. She was dating someone who didn't see her as a resource to be drained. I cried reading that email. Not from sadness but from recognition. That had been me. Was still me in some ways. We never fully stop being the people we were, we just add new layers, new strength, new understanding. At 35, I stood in front of 200 people at a fundraising gala for Rebuild Foundation. The room was full of donors, survivors, advocates, people who believed that escaping abuse was possible and worth supporting. I told them about coming home sick to find my bedroom destroyed, about Derek's fist and Brianna's laughter and the long road from that moment to this one. I told them about the people we'd helped, the lives we'd literally saved, the cycles we'd broken. But mostly I told them about the math. How I'd calculated for years that if I just gave enough, sacrificed enough, diminished myself enough, eventually I'd earn love and safety. How that equation had never balanced because the premise was flawed. You can't earn what should be given freely. You can't buy safety from people who profit from your fear. The only math that matters is this: your well-being plus your boundaries equals a life worth living. Everything else is subtraction. The speech received a standing ovation. More importantly, we raised enough that night to expand to 2 more cities. After the event, as Alex and I walked back to our car through Seattle's glittering downtown, I thought about the girl I'd been. 27 years old, feverish and beaten, sitting in the wreckage of her room with nowhere to go. If I could go back and tell her anything, it would be this: the fear you feel right now about leaving is real, but the freedom on the other side is more real. The family you lose wasn't family in any way that matters. The life you'll build will be harder than staying, but it will be yours. And that possession, that ownership of your own existence, is worth everything you'll pay to claim it. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. Woman just called the crisis line. Says she came home to find her partner destroyed her art studio. Sounds familiar. Getting her intake paperwork started. You around tomorrow to talk to her? I typed back immediately. Absolutely. Send me her info. Another person at the beginning of their own journey from survival to freedom. Another person who needed to know that escape was possible, that justice could be found, that the other side of abuse wasn't just more pain but actual peace. We got to the car and Alex drove us home through rain-slicked streets. Our house, a small craftsman we'd bought 2 years ago, glowed with warm light. Inside were our 2 cats, our mismatched furniture, our life built piece by careful piece. No drama, no chaos, no walking on eggshells. Just the quiet contentment of safety. That night I updated the nonprofit's impact report. 372 people helped this year. 47 active legal cases supported. Over 600,000 in emergency grants distributed. Numbers that represented lives, futures, freedom. But the number that mattered most couldn't be quantified. How many people had learned they deserved better? How many had chosen themselves? How many had discovered that family wasn't who you shared blood with but who showed up when you needed them? I closed my laptop and looked around our living room. Photos on the walls of our wedding, our friends, places we'd traveled. Not a single image of Derek or Carol or Brianna. Not because I'd erased them with anger but because I'd simply moved forward without them. They were part of my past, had shaped who I became, but they didn't define my present or my future. Alex brought me tea and sat beside me on the couch. Long day. Long year. Good year though. The best kind of exhaustion. He kissed my forehead. I'm proud of you. You know that, right? I leaned into him. I'm proud of me too. That was growth. Being able to acknowledge my own strength, my own worth, without qualifying it or minimizing it. The girl who'd been trained to make herself small would never have said those words. This version of me owned them completely. Later that night, unable to sleep, I pulled up the cloud backup from 7 years ago. The files Derek had thought he'd destroyed but had never touched. Photos of my grandmother smiling in her garden. Documents from my early certifications. The beginnings of the work that would become my career. All of it preserved, safe, untouchable. I created a new folder and started documenting the past 5 years. Not the trauma but the transformation. Photos of our wedding, the nonprofit's first office, speaking engagements, people we'd helped who'd given permission to share their stories. This was the backup that mattered now. Evidence not of what I'd survived but of what I'd built from that survival. Tomorrow I'd talk to the woman whose art studio had been destroyed. I'd tell her my story and help her begin to write her own. I'd show her the path from victim to survivor to advocate, from powerless to empowered to purposeful. The road wouldn't be easy but it would be worth traveling. Because on the other side wasn't just escape from pain. It was the discovery that you were never as powerless as they wanted you to believe. That you contained multitudes they tried to suppress. That your life, lived on your own terms, was the ultimate form of justice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.